सवैया जोत जीते इन्हीं के प्रसाद इन्हीं के प्रसाद सुदान करे अक अवगटार इन्हीं के प्रसाद इन्हीं की कृपा पुण्य धाम भरे इन्हीं के प्रसाद सो विद्यालय इन्हीं की कृपा सब सत्य मरे नहीं की कृपा के सजे हम हैं नहीं पोसो गरीब करोड़ मरे.
So, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another episode of the Sikh Renaissance. And today we have a very esteemed guest with us, Debunking Islam, who is joining us today to discuss incidents and the green lighting of pedophilia in Islam as a religious and societal practice. So, the necessity for this episode arose after many Muslim preachers in the UK have started declaring the founders of the Sikh religion, accusing them of pedophilia as well, when in reality that was different. They were children being engaged, and then eventually, when they were in puberty, they were married, and then after puberty, they were allowed to get together and have a family, as was the custom in Punjab in the old days. However, while we can reply back to them with these facts, we believe at the Sikh Renaissance that it is imperative we actually also analyze the pedophilia in the Islamic religion and see why they go around accusing others of pedophilia when it's their own prophet who did this. So, a very warm welcome to you, Debunking Islam. How are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And looking forward to having this talk. It's an important one. It's a factual one, and it's one that has real implications around the world even today. If you look at the countries with the highest rates of child marriages, you will find that 8 or 9 out of the top 10 are Islamic majority countries. And it isn't just those countries which are dominated by Islam. It is, of course, in the Western world, we're now seeing a rise of child rape gangs on a scale we haven't ever seen before. In the UK, it's estimated about 90% of child rape gangs are committed by 4% of the population, which is the Islamic Pakistani population. Of course, there's issues with love jihad in India, and pretty much wherever you see Islamic diasporas of any type of size, you'll see the same pattern. And there is a reason for that, because Islam allows it, as you will find out today.
So, before proceeding onwards, first of all, we have these terms. There's the clinical definition of pedophilia, then there's child marriage. And there are many people who will argue, let's just be honest to them, that they're on the left side of the political spectrum. They will argue that these are, there are multiple definitions, etc., etc. Facts change, your truth, my truth. So how do we define child marriage in this particular context when we are talking about Islam?
Sorry, I was just getting a phone call there, so I missed you for about a second or two there. But essentially, you were asking about a definition of pedophilia and how...
Basically, the whole child marriage thing where it's related to Islam. How do we
define absolutely,
it? Just to make things more easy.
Well, absolutely. I mean, what you'll find, certainly in debates I've had with a number of Muslims, in fact, hundreds, and some very prominent Muslims like Ali Dawah, they will tell you that Islam allows intercourse at puberty. So when a girl reaches puberty, it allows intercourse. Now, in my worldview, a child will still be pubescent. It's, in my worldview, and in fact, the medical view is a child isn't a child, or an adult, until they have completed physical and mental maturity, which is essentially 18 years old. Paedophilia essentially is a simple definition of attraction to children. If you get into the definitions a bit deeper, it tends to look at prepubescent children. That is at the absolute extreme, and Islam allows that too. And so whichever way you cut the cake, Islam allows intercourse with children in every definition of the word.
Right. So obviously you make one really important point down here, that it's not when they enter puberty, it's not when they're undergoing puberty, it's post-puberty.
Sure.
where
Yeah.
the sexual activity should come into play. So
Absolutely. And what happens with Muslims if they will grey the area? They will say, when's a child fully mature? Because, of course, people do have different speeds, don't they? But we have to have a baseline. And the baseline in the West is essentially 18. Because at 18, we know that 95% of females will be would have completed physical maturity, and they would have attained enough brain maturation to be able to give informed consent. That's why 18 makes absolute sense. You do have to have a cutoff point, but it's not arbitrary. 18 is at least 95% of girls will be physically and mentally mature enough to engage in intercourse and make that decision to do that.
right, and before we do proceed onwards, I would like to point out that there was a study done by Caroline G. Bell, who's actually pretty much brought up the point that even in ancient Rome, Byzantium, and ancient Greece, there were actually rules. She's written a study, Minor Marriage in Early Islamic Law,
Yep,
and that those rules basically had that while children could be engaged and when they were undergoing puberty, they could be married. Any
yep,
consummation had to happen after the puberty was finished, and there were actually death sentences that were pronounced in ancient times. So it was found that there was, obviously child rape occurring. And
absolutely,
in the context of this, we're saying where the child can't actually obviously consent to what is being done to them. However, Muhammad
absolutely.
came along and changed everything. So now we come to the gist of the matter that many Muslim apologists claim that, hey, this is what is said in the Hadiths. It's not written in the Quran. How correct are they on this?
If they want to be Quran only Muslims and ignore all hadiths, they have removed Muhammad from existence. Muhammad essentially doesn't exist in the Quran. He only comes alive in the hadiths. We only find out information about Muhammad from the hadith. So if a Muslim wants to ignore the hadiths, they will ignore Muhammad. Muhammad doesn't exist. His wives don't exist. The companions don't exist. Islamic history doesn't exist. They will just have a book which will not be able to be explained by them. So if they want to do that, they've just basically ignored pretty much their entire basis of their religion, because with Islamic law, it's not just based on what the Quran says, it is based on what Muhammad did and said, because that in itself is seen as divine revelation. So you have the words of Allah in the Quran, and you have the words of Allah through the actions and deeds of and words of Muhammad himself. That is what Sunni Islam is based upon. And so if they make that argument, they have just become a heretic, and under Islamic law, they would be executed for saying that.
Right. So when we come to the Quran and the Hadiths themselves, do we have any references that we can provide to say that, wait, this is what's happening?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that last bit.
Yes. So do we have any references from the Hadiths and the Qurans talking about this pedophilia, saying that it's so prevalent all over the Islamic world?
Absolutely, yeah. The Quran itself gives at least one verse. However, it's debated. There's 3 to 4 verses in the Quran that make it very clear that you're able to marry minors. One particular verse which makes it very clear that intercourse would have happened with a minor, and because Allah legislates for divorcing the child you've had sex with, shows that Allah is clearly saying it's okay to marry and have intercourse with minors. And the hadiths themselves, there's a number of hadiths which refer to the rape of minor slaves, but also Muhammad encouraging his men to literally marry prepubescent children for sexual gratification. And I'll provide that at some point in this discussion. I'll give you the reference for that.
Yep. So when we actually discuss, like, okay, so for example, someone might say, well, back in the day, this was like a customary practice, etc., etc. And now that, obviously science has proven, I mean, even back then, I think it
Yeah,
was Galen, the ancient Greek physicist, who basically proved that if a, prepubescent female gets penetrated, her, you know, uh, I think vaginal canal is so heavily damaged that she can't have children for the rest of her life. So we know there was some sort of awareness about, like, the
absolutely. Yeah,
bodily damage that could happen, the trauma that could happen to this. And now
that's
you
right.
come into modern times and you have a section of people still believing in this. How would you say they justify this even today?
Well, they will, first of all, Muslims themselves, the apologists, will deny that Islam allows intercourse before puberty. So all the modern Dawah Gandhists online, your Muslim Lent and your Muhammad hijab, they will put the argument that it only allows it at puberty, and puberty is essentially the point at which a child is physically mature. Of course, that is shocking, and I'll go through the definitions of Islamic puberty and what makes an adult and what makes a child still a child. But they will essentially argue it that way, that it's at puberty, and then they will try to get you into a grey area where you're not really able to decide for you or to say objectively when somebody is fully physically mature. They will throw off one-off absurdities like maybe a 20-year-old hasn't fully developed yet, and so you can't always say that someone's fully developed at 18. Of course, as I say, that's why we have a baseline. You can never get it absolutely perfect. However, if you look at 18 as the age where a person is fully developed, you will be covering 95% of females, probably more than that. But that's how they will essentially excuse it. They will also use the excuse that you can't cause harm in Islam. Now, harm is obviously, again, very subjective because Islam allows execution. Well, that's harm. It allows many forms of harm within certain legal frameworks. And so when it's applied to child marriage, essentially, as I'll go through with you, as long as the girl doesn't tear from the anus to the vagina during intercourse, she's considered by law to be able to tolerate intercourse. And so as long as you don't permanently damage that child, she's ready for sex. And that's exactly what the legal manuals of all four schools of Islamic law say.
And I do believe, I think it was Mashoud or Mashid Badarin, who's the professor at the University of London, who actually pointed out that
Yeah.
there was a bit of a controversy over a Quran verse. If I remember correctly, it's Quran 56:4, and the conclusion they made was that the majority classical view held by the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, and Itna Shari schools of Islamic jurisprudence is that marriage of minors is permissible and may be contracted by the father or guardian acting in the minor's best interest. This
Yep.
is based on their interpretation of the
Yep.
three Quranic verses earlier cited. So, first, they argue that the statement, and those who have not yet menstruated, which is
Yep.
in Quran 56:4, refers to
65-4.
minors. 65
Quran
4, yes, sorry.
65-4. Yep.
Yep, who have not yet started menstruating. They inferred that prescription or waiting, which is also called the iddah,
Yep.
in case of divorce for those who have not menstruated, which they interpret to mean minors who have not yet started menstruating,
Yes.
indirectly indicates permissibility of marriage of minors, because without a marriage you can't have a iddah.
Absolutely. But it also shows that you can have intercourse with them, because the whole point of that waiting period is to ensure that she's not pregnant. So I'll go through that in detail with you to show that that's how it's understood, that because there's a waiting period, because without the waiting period is only required if intercourse has occurred. If there's no intercourse, the Quran says very clearly, if there's no intercourse, there's no waiting period. So by definition, because Quran 6, sorry, go on.
Yep, so basically I suppose the trauma has already occurred, and this is just a means of passing her along and saying, well, hey, let's just wait before we start the trauma all over again.
Absolutely. So in Islam, you can marry a minor who's already been divorced and deflowered. Let that sink in. And this is under Islamic law. If this is under perfect conditions, of course, hopefully there'll never be a case in history again where Islam dominates to the point that all the actual Islamic laws and legal codes are actually put into place. That probably won't happen because of pressure from the West. The West will always put pressure on these countries to stop slavery, child marriage, sex slaves, things like that. They can't get away with what they would get away with if Islam was literally able to be implemented in the way that allegedly their God has demanded that it's implemented on earth. But yeah, 65:4 is the verse. That is the irrefutable proof that Allah himself, so even if you're Quran only, makes it very clear that you can marry and have sex with minors.
Okay, so when we look at these references, can you share those references with us that actually point out this practice, because many people do labor under this delusion that maybe it's just the extremists who have come up with their own interpretations. Maybe
Absolutely
some
not.
things have been changed, but in reality, when we look at Quran, the argument in the Quran itself is that it's unchangeable, isn't it? That it's set in stone by Allah,
Yes,
speaking figuratively.
absolutely. Yeah, it's the perfect word of God in accordance with the Islamic paradigm, and so it's not changeable. And so this is why they lay claim to having this objective morality, because their morality is unchangeable. Muhammad is the physical application of Allah's morality. He is almost the Quran in physical form. And so if Muhammad has intercourse with a child, he's doing it in accordance with eternal Islamic law. And so this is why, as I said earlier, not only is it the Quran which is used to create legal law, the laws, Muhammad's actual example is used to create laws as well. And so in Islamic law, you are allowed to have intercourse with children and marry them because Muhammad did. And that's what all the scholars say. That's what even all the modern giant fatwa sites today like Islam QA, Islam Web, they all say the same thing, and they always reference Muhammad's example as well as Quran 654. So I can go through all that again as quick as I can do with you. But yep, I've got the references all here, and I can, as I say, I'll go through a few slides that I pre-prepared, and I can give you the references as I go along. I'll quote the hadiths for you as well, and I'll just explain a little bit more about each hadith and each Quran verse, so you get an idea of the fact that this is pure Islamic. It's not extremist interpretations. It is what the religion allows, because that's what the texts say.
Yep, please go ahead.
Yep. All right. So what I'll do, I'll start with just a very quick definition of what a child and adult is in Islam, because it's a bit different to how we see it in the West. So to answer the question, was Muhammad a paedophile? We need to know whether Islam allows paedophilia. We have already covered some of this. So let's now look first at how an adult and a child are defined in Islamic law. So in Arabic, the word for puberty is bulugh. Okay, it's B-U-L-U-G-H. Again, anyone can contact me with references or dictionary, lexicons, anything like that. Bulugh means to attain maturity or adulthood. A child who reaches puberty is called a baligh if they're male, or baligha if they're female. Again, the definition of baligh or baligha refers to someone who is now a mature adult. So in Islamic law, to become pubescent literally means to become an adult. In Islamic law, reaching puberty doesn't just mean that you're considered to be physically mature. It also means you're mentally mature. And this can be seen in a hadith where Muhammad says the pen is lifted when a child reaches puberty. And that means they are not legally responsible for their actions until puberty. You can find that hadith. There's many different narrations. I'm personally looking at the one by Musnad Ahmed, 940, but you can find this hadith all over. You've got it in all the books except Bukhari, I believe.
Yep.
A scholar called Sheikh Uthaymeen, who's actually a modern scholar, he confirms the meaning of that pen is lifted at puberty hadith. And so here's what he says. A child is considered mentally mature at puberty because it's at puberty that they become legally responsible for their actions, just as the insane who lack mental capacity are only held accountable if they regain their faculties of reason. So it's at puberty that you not only become physically mature, you become mentally mature as well. And so in Islam, like in the West, a child can't exercise a choice or give consent. So the take-home message at this point is that in Islam, you cannot be a pubescent child. Islamic law defines children as someone who's pre-pubescent and an adult as someone who's pubescent, because it's at puberty that a person is considered to be physically and mentally mature. This is why Islamic law itself says that when a child reaches puberty, they have legal capacity and then can give consent. So the definition of puberty is where you really need to understand how bad this then becomes. Because the way puberty is defined in Islamic law can be actually explained by Islam QA. And so I'm just looking at Islam QA now. This is the biggest fatwa site on the planet. It's certainly on the internet. It's run by sheikhs in Saudi Arabia. So these are scholars who run this. They define puberty as this. A girl will become an adult when they display one of these pubertal signs: a wet dream, if they have pubic hair, if they menstruate, if they are pregnant, or if they reach 15 lunar years, which is 14 and a half years. So if a girl hasn't had any, is not pregnant, doesn't have pubic hair, or doesn't have a wet dream, or doesn't menstruate, she will be an adult automatically at 14 and a half 14 and a half solar years, which is 15 lunar years. So just again, look. It's not a process like it is in the West. It's defined by a sign. So just one sign. If a girl has any pubic hair, she's automatically an adult. If she has a wet dream, automatically an adult. If she has menstruation, automatically an adult. And if she's pregnant, now think about that. If pregnancy is the first sign of a child's pubertal status, then it must mean that she was having intercourse before puberty.
Pretty much.
So yep. So that's how the definitions work, and so that's the mainstream Islamic view. Some scholars say if they don't display any of those signs I just read out to you, it's aged 17 for girls, 17 lunar years, which is 16 and a half. But that's a minority opinion, and most girls would have menstruated long before 17 in today's day and age. Certainly. Does that all make sense so far?
Yep, so that makes sense. And we need to remember something. So this is all basically arbitrary. There's no scientific, no realistic baseline for this. It's all just arbitrary. Basically what Muhammad kept on revealing to them or saying was being revealed to him.
The reason the wet dream is actually considered a sign of puberty is because Muhammad and Allah believed that when a girl, I don't want to get too into the anatomical and the sexual aspects. If a girl releases arousal fluid, which happens in intimacy, very normal thing, that is believed to be semen, which recreates life. So a man creates semen, and the female creates semen, and they mix to create babies. So that in Islam, this is true. And so they didn't know that it was menstruation. They knew that menstruation stopped when a girl was pregnant, but they didn't know that menstruation was actually just the egg being released. And of course they didn't. Most people didn't know at the time. But unfortunately for Allah, who was speaking with perfect knowledge of all things, he thought that when a girl actually has arousal fluid, she releases semen. I don't have the hadith on me, but there's a very clear hadith that Muhammad actually says this very clearly, that when a girl has a wet dream, it's the fluid that would lead to a child being born. And if she comes before the male, the child will be a female. So that's why wet dreams are actually a pubertal sign for females as well as males, because actually in the Islamic paradigm, it's actually semen that creates a baby. It's insane, but it's true. Unfortunately for Islam, girls can actually release arousal fluid from very, 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 very early. We're talking infancy. So if that's a pubertal sign, technically under Islamic law, little girls of infancy can even be an adult. It's terrifying.
Right, and all this basically, so let's just imagine this is like a funnel with a filter. Everything's just being filtered down to one potential point of exit, which we can call the destination. And the destination for all this basically is that you go and, to put it a bit colloquially, is go bang a minor, basically. That's the aim of all the scholarship, basically. They're indulging in all these debates and these sophistications. It basically comes down to that you can not only marry a minor when you're an adult yourself, but you can also engage in sexual activities with these minors.
Absolutely, 100%, yes. As long as she's, they consider her as able to tolerate intercourse. As I said, no physical damage, i.e. her anal canal and her vaginal canal don't become one orifice. As long as that doesn't happen, she's considered to be able to tolerate intercourse. The basis on which they base that on, the criteria, is her fatness. So if the child looks robust or big enough to be able to tolerate intercourse, then she can be handed over to the husband to have sex with her. And as long as he doesn't physically damage her, she's able to tolerate intercourse. So it's not based on puberty. It's actually based on a subjective assessment of her physical ability to be able to have sex, just by looking at the child and saying, could she take it or not? It's disgusting. And it is exactly what their legal scholars, all their jurists say. There's one scholar, one classical, who did say puberty, but he got completely lambasted by all of his peers, who said that he is given a view that's not found in any of the texts and must be ignored, because they are very clear that puberty is not required for sex. And out of the thousands of scholars, I've only found one classical and one modern who have actually said no puberty. So
Right.
yeah, they can't deny this. I mean, they can sell this to you, but they have nothing to back up their words with. And so I can certainly show hundreds of scholars saying that you can have sex with a minor, and I'll go through a few in a minute.
Yep. And I believe it's Sahih al-Bukhari, book 6, hadith 6, number 299, 300 and 301, that Aisha was narrating that when she used to be on her period, Muhammad used to come and tie her, basically. And that's another thing that used to happen with minors as well around that time, was that if you can't penetrate them, then you can tie them at least, until you ejaculate over them.
You are absolutely correct. So there is no, so that was something that I would have ended with the slides I was going to go through with you. Is that exactly that even if she can't tolerate it, there's no law that says you can't touch the minor and get sexual gratification that way. Now, there's no legal reason or there's no legal law to stop it. It is halal. However, some scholars do say they don't recommend it, not because they say it's wrong for touching a minor or a minor that can't even have sex, but because they are worried that the man will get so carried away, he will then have actual penetrative sex with her and harm the child. So they discourage you actually touching and playing with your infant minor wife because of the potential that you will go too far with it. But they don't say you can't do it because it's wrong, because you can do it in Islamic law. And I've got quite a few scholars who say this. Ibn Qudamah makes it very clear that if a man's feeling the need, he can use his minor wife's hand. You can fight the wife, you're absolutely correct. You can do everything but penetration. In the case of a minor who can't handle it, a minor that can handle it, you can penetrate. And we say can handle it, just doesn't get completely damaged to the point where she'd probably die. And that's what the law says.
When we come to the scholars at the very least now, say for example, are these the scholars who the Muslim world has a majority consensus around? Like, I mean, you might be debating a Muslim and they might say, well, hey,
Yep.
that's the scholar's opinion. That's not the scholar I follow. So are we looking at the fact that who the majority of the Muslim world follows? Or is this like something like you come and pick and choose your gift, you come and pick and choose your scholars?
No. So you're absolutely right. That's a classical debate tactic to deflect and get out of awkward situations where they will say that's just one scholar. Now, if it was just one scholar, they may have a point. But unfortunately for the Muslims, all four schools of Islamic law, and so the main four are the Shafis, the Hanbalis, the Hanafis, and the Malikis. All four schools say you can marry a minor and you can have intercourse with a minor if she can tolerate it. There are one or two dissenting scholars, but it's a phenomenally minor opinion. It's a virtual consensus that you can marry and have intercourse with the minor. It's to the point where they cannot go against the majority view of the scholars. Allah himself says that he will not allow his community to make error. And what he means by that is the scholars. If the scholars agree on something, it's because Allah has made it so. The 99%, I'd say 99.9% of the scholars will agree that you can have sex with a minor as long as she won't get harmed by it. And again, harm just means her vagina and anus being torn. So they can't say you're cherry picking, and I would never do that. I don't like Islam, but I respect it enough not to lie about it. I don't need to. It's what Islam really teaches is more terrifying than anyone can really imagine, especially on this.
Right. And when we're considering the sex with the minors part, does this also extend to minor girls of the enemy who have been killed, etc.?
Absolutely. Yep. So, of course, as you probably know a little bit about, or you may know about jihad, essentially, as disbelievers, me and you, we are the enemy. We are seen as the enemy who Muslims must eternally attack until we either submit to Islam or convert. They're basically our two choices. And by submission, it's when you pay the jizya. And so the men will fight, most men will die, some will be enslaved, but the women and children, although they can actually kill women and children if it's to get to the enemy, i.e. the men, the women and children are seen as property. The children will be converted to Islam and the women will be taken as sex slaves. The women and the children, females, are absolutely halal. I've got hundreds and hundreds of references showing that you can have intercourse with the minor slave child. So it absolutely does extend to non-Muslim slave girls that you can have sex with as well. And most of
these
them
are
say
minors. We're basically talking about little young
little
girls, prepubescent girls.
prepubescent girls. And so the scholars have a debate about whether when you take a, let's just say a Christian or a Jew or a Sikh or a Hindu girl, can you have intercourse with her immediately? And so when we just spoke about the waiting period, when you take a slave girl in Islam, you have what's called istibra. You have to wait one menstrual cycle to ensure she is not pregnant, so the Muslim male doesn't get saddled with a child that's not his. But in the case of a minor who doesn't menstruate, some say you still need to wait 1 month because you don't know whether she has had intercourse, or if she, but most scholars actually do say that no, if she's a virgin and if she is a minor, you don't have to wait, which means you can have sex with her immediately from capture. With an adult or a menstruating female, let's say, you have to wait until she menstruates once before you can have sex with her. So that's essentially the rule. So some people who do debate Muslims make a big mistake. They think that the girls are immediately raped from day one. Islamic law says that actually you need to wait for one menstrual cycle if they're an adult, but if they're a minor, majority say you don't have to wait because there's no fear that she'd be pregnant, so you can rape her immediately. Touching is a different thing. You can touch the slave girl immediately. You can do anything you want with her, just not sex if she's menstruating. You have to wait till she actually menstruates once just to make sure she's not pregnant.
And touching is not your basic high five, like, hey, give me a high five. This is not the first thing you say.
It's everything you can imagine, but actual penetration, everything else. You can put your penis between her buttocks, her thighs, mouth, use her hand, do whatever you want, but you cannot put your penis inside of her until she's had one menstruation. But if she's a minor, you don't need to wait. You can have sex with her immediately. Again, I could debate this all day. I could show reference after reference. There's a number of hadiths. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I've got a number of hadiths that I intend to do a presentation on it and to show people, because I get quite tired of seeing all these modern Muslims excuse this. And of course, it underpins a lot of the reasons why we see this love jihad, why we see rape gangs in Britain, because you can have sex with a minor and you can literally take a non-Muslim girl as your concubine. And that's exactly what we're seeing in England and other parts of the world. So it's all based in their texts. It's not just random that this is happening. It's rooted in their Islamic scripture. And Muhammad allowed it. Muhammad would tell his men, come and fight with me to take the blonde girls. These are Sahih hadiths. He's motivating his men to fight for him in the promise of getting women, of getting girls, females, children. It's all in their scripture. They just, a lot of them don't know their own scripture, to be fair. And so they just believe what they're told by whoever's on the YouTube channel, or I'm sure the imams themselves are obviously covering up the truth for them as well. But it doesn't stop it happening. And denying
So
it is
when
never
we're
going to
looking
fix it.
Yep. And when we look at this point now in today's time, basically saying that there is this allegation of you're Islamophobic or you're making up lies, this is right-wing conservatism. The best one I've heard is that you're a Donald Trump supporter. So it's it's almost like they put you in a sort of a situation where trying to use the expressions of extreme left wing and extreme right wing critics to sort of try shutting down any debate. Now, when that happens, like they interpret you saying Muhammad was a pedophile as some sort of attack on their very religious principles, which in a way it probably can be seen as an attack, but a much needed attack. So do
Absolutely.
you think that this allegation holds any water? I mean, we're seeing people like you speaking out now. We're speaking, like we have seen multiple other people like us from other communities beginning to speak out and say, hey, wait, look, there is a problem somewhere along with these individuals, this particular belief system. So do you think in the future, as more and more people are becoming vocal, that this problem will go not go away, but become smaller, or there's going to be that last surge of, I suppose, extreme pedophilia before it dies out? Like, would there be reform, or no, we are just actually having to confront this problem head on?
Well, Islam can't reform what the texts say. So there's no way around that. What you could argue is that the issue that the Muslims themselves have is the texts are very clear on what it says, and so they would have to massively ignore a huge amount of the text. Now, if you are a Christian, it's quite easy to ignore some of the more troubling aspects of the Bible. Because it's not the perfect word of God, and so because of that, you've got wiggle room and you're able to sort of interpret things very differently. When Muhammad or Allah actually speaks about sex with kids, there's no other way of interpreting it. So they don't really, from a textual point of view, there's not much that the Muslims themselves can do. Does it mean that they could actually still reform things? Possibly. I mean, they could do that, but then by doing that, they'd have to deny their own text, which pretty much means you're not Muslim. The problem they also have is that the earliest scholars are considered the most authoritative, and so there's kind of this hierarchy in Islam. The greatest Muslims were the earlier generations, and then it continues down. So the earliest were the greatest, and the next generation were the second greatest. And because the earliest scholars are the most authoritative, and they all have a consensus on intercourse with minors and marriage and intercourse, they don't really have much way around it. But if they want to ignore their texts, I suppose that could happen. I mean, I think it's slightly happening in the West in some ways. I mean, we're seeing this growth of child marriages, rape gangs in Britain. So already we are seeing that, kind of feeding into what you're saying, that it is actually getting worse. The point at which the West can stop this is by being honest and not be silenced by claims of Islamophobia and saying, actually, I just really care about human beings. And actually, I didn't wake up one day and say to myself, I really don't like how the Muslim community is doing this, and we need to be honest about Muslims. That's what the texts say. This is what a lot of the followers of the religion are doing. We just have to be honest about it. And if we can do that, we can change it. And Muslims themselves will have to toe the line. That will then, I think, feed back into the culture and maybe stop this. Because one of the things with the rape gangs is all these within communities, the Muslim people who are not perpetrating it still know it's going on. It's families, it's uncles, it's brothers. They all know it's going on. They don't talk out about it, because in Islam you can't talk against a fellow Muslim to a non-Muslim. That's haram. So there's a lot that I think that the Western world need to be honest about with what they're facing, and confront Muslims who deny it. And that's, I suppose, partly kind of what I've tried to do with Muslims and say, look, this is what your religion does say. And when the penny drops, I mean, I was in Speaker's Corner a few weeks ago and debated a Muslim there, showed him exactly what the scholars said. And then he just asked me, was I filming it? When I said no, he just shook my hand and walked away. He didn't acknowledge what had happened. He just tried to get out of it. And he was so scared that I'd filmed it. And I partly wish I had done. It was just a random conversation. He didn't know that I was prepared. And so he thought I was just a random person standing there, and confronted me. And he said, why am I not a Muslim? And I said, well, first of all, your religion allows for the rape of children. And he then tried to give me the Dawah script, but I've heard it all before. I showed him a quote by al-Shafi, who says very clearly, and al-Shafi is one of Islam's greatest scholars. He says, if anyone asks you why we allow daughters to be married off, quote the hadith of Muhammad, who married and had sex with Aisha. Both situations occurred when she still had no ability to give consent. And the Arabic he uses is the word al-sagira, which means prepubescent minor. When I showed him that, he could read Arabic, and he read it, and he looked at me, and he knew and he went silent. I wish I had recorded it, because it was one of the greatest takedowns I've ever seen. And I didn't even intend it to be that way. It just happened, and he walked straight away. And he's actually on YouTube. He's quite well known. He's not a big YouTuber, but he's on there debating a lot of the Christian apologists and public out on the streets of London. And I wonder whether he's now going to consider that interaction and maybe rethink his religion a little bit, or will he just go back to the Dawah script and hope the next person doesn't know as much as I did? But yeah, I think hopefully things can change in that way. I think if you look at Saudi Arabia, it's changing. It's changing in Saudi Arabia. It's changing in Dubai. Islamic countries are becoming less Islamic because they're throwing Islam in the bin. Saudi Arabia is literally taking Islamic law and they're flushing it down the toilet. They're bringing in more secular Western laws because they know that Islam doesn't offer a very impressive, lucrative way of governance. It doesn't keep the people happy. It doesn't help with trade. It doesn't help with things that are important for a country to succeed in the modern world. And so, in a way, things are already getting better, because 10 years ago in Saudi Arabia, women couldn't leave the house. Now they can. 10 years ago, you couldn't wear a crucifix in Saudi Arabia. Now you can. So things are getting better in some ways, whilst in the West, I think we've got some trouble ahead, because we are so woke and left, and we're just not being honest about this. And we're shut down by cries of racism. I mean, as I spoke to you before, I'm not white, yet I get called racist often just to talk about an ideology. I never talk about race or skin color. I talk about an ideology. I'm talking about the rape of children. How can I be racist? Even Islamophobic. Everyone should be Islamophobic if we're talking about fighting child rape laws.
Yep, and I would like to ask another question down here. So we're considering, so we we've just had this conversation on raping minors of another religion. Now, from some of the hadiths you have quoted and the verses, it also seems that now obviously we have to say it's rape because a minor can't really consent. So two
Absolutely.
questions actually come out here. A, is this only for girls? And B, what about their own minor girls? Are they allowed to do this to them as well?
Are they allowed to have sex with Muslim minors?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's what's, yeah. I mean, Quran 65:4 is literally referring to the marriage of a Muslim, of a believing woman or child. It's referring to that and for the intercourse. So absolutely. They don't, so always remember that females in Islam are created for the pleasure of men. They're not equal. There's not this concept of women's rights. The only rights that a female's given in marriage, for example, is to be fed, to be clothed, and to have a roof over their head. And for that, the man pays her a dowry, which is payment for the right to unfettered access to her vagina. Again, this is what all the scholars say. So in Islam, you may or may not know, but marriage, the word is nikah, and nikah actually means sex. It's actually slightly
Right.
more. It's actually slightly more graphic. It actually means to F. So to get married in Islam is to F in Islam. Yeah, it's all based around sex. So marriage isn't an act of love in Islam. It's a way of sexually gratifying yourself. And so the Quran makes it very clear that when a man feels the need and desire, he is to then marry. Not for love, not meet a woman and fall in love. It's about when you have that need for sex, it's very important that you then get married. Because in Islam, the one thing that Allah seems obsessed with is sex outside of marriage. It's called zina. And so you must get married in order not to commit a crime. And so he encourages you to marry early, which is why they also legislate for such early marriages, because it's basically giving men more options for females. Of course, purity culture. So the virgin is seen in Islam as much more enticing. For example, Muhammad himself says, marry a virgin because their mouths and their wombs are sweeter. And so you need to get the girl, the earlier the better. And so again, it all feeds into these child marriage laws, which basically promote pedophilia, because the whole point is to have sex with her, and virgins are much more appealing. So let me just quickly find you hadith, which will just prove to you, because we know that Muhammad married a child, so we don't really need to prove he's a paedophile, because we know he did marry a 6-year-old. But let me just go through this with you. I've never seen anyone discuss this hadith, but it's pretty shocking. So for your audience, they want to bring up Bukhari 4052. Okay.
Right.
In this hadith, Muhammad asks a man who just got married whether he married a virgin or a matron. So a matron is essentially a divorcee, but it also relates to an adult. So the man says he married a matron. So then Muhammad, who seems very puzzled, says, why didn't you marry a young girl who he could fondle and who could fondle him? The man replies by saying this, and this is the key bit. He says he has young sisters and didn't want to marry another young girl like them, but wanted to marry a woman who would care for them. Now, the Arabic Muhammad and that companion used for young girl is Jariya. Ibn Hajar, who's a giant scholar, says Jariya refers to a girl who has not reached puberty. Imam Nawawi, huge scholar, says Jariya refers to a free young girl, which refers to minor. And he uses the word Sigira to make it very clear that he's saying Jariya refers to minor. This scholar says, the hadith I just read out to you, he says this, This hadith shows it's preferable to marry a young virgin girl if there's no reason to the contrary. He uses the word sigira, which means prepubescent. Ibn al-Malikin says this hadith is evidence it's okay to marry a previously married woman if there's a reason. The reason the companion did not marry a virgin but a previously married woman was because he had sisters who had not reached puberty. However, because Muhammad asked why he didn't marry a child is evidence marrying children is preferable. So the context itself makes it clear that Muhammad is referring to sexual activity with pubescent girls because he not only references her virgin status as a reason to marry, but he also mentions playing with her as the primary reason to marry. Now, I have debated Muslims who go, oh, playing just means like childish games. Now, I can debunk that. I can debunk that quite easily because, as I've explained to you, in Islam, the whole reason, and I've got the verse here now, 32:24, Allah says if a man cannot afford to marry, he should abstain from intercourse until he can afford it. In her hadith by Sahih Muslim 1400C, he says to get married, but if you can't get married because you can't afford it, fast to reduce your sexual desire. So this is just showing that marriage, the whole reason to marry is for sex, right? Al-Shalabi says the whole purpose of marriage is sex. Al-Shafi says the reason to marry is for the benefit of sex. So, because we get married is the main reason to marry, we know when Muhammad said, why didn't you marry a child so you could play with her? He must be referring to sex because the whole reason he's telling people to get married is to have sex. However, if you don't even believe what I've just said there, Ibn Malikin, who talks about the hadith I just read out to you, said the hadith shows that foreplay is desirable to reduce the virgin's shyness so the man can fulfill his sexual need. Islam Web say the exact same thing about that hadith, and you want to go to Fatwa 100258, where you will see that they understand that hadith as Muhammad encouraging men to marry virgins because their mouths are sweeter, their wombs are sweeter, and to fulfill your need. So the bottom line is this, that hadith, Bukhari 4052, proves Muhammad encouraged his men to marry prepubescent minors to have sex with them. So a man who promotes marrying children to have sexual fun is obviously described as one word, and that's a PDF file. and that hadith is absolutely irrefutable. So it's not only did Muhammad have sex with a child, he clearly was encouraging it. The hadith is absolutely clear. I've never seen a Muslim able to refute that because they can't, because it's literally what it says. So yeah, it's in their scripture, as you can see. And it's just having that time and the knowledge to be able to actually confront Muslims on this, because it's very hard to have a 5-minute conversation and get a lot of this information in. And Muslims themselves, a lot of them are lied to themselves. They don't really know a lot of this stuff exists. But if they're honest, they know there's a problem, because as I say, 8 out of 9, 10, or 9 of the 10 countries in the world where the highest rates of child marriages are Islamic. There's a reason for it. So yeah, hopefully that's all made a bit of sense. I know it all seems probably a bit jumbled and kind of hard to follow, I suppose, without showing slides on screen. But I mean, I'm very happy to do a presentation on my YouTube channel of this very discussion, and I can put in the slides so people can just find the references. I give all the links so you can literally just go online and find every single thing that I've said.
No, definitely. Please do that, and our listeners will probably appreciate it. So to start summarizing, now that we have reached the near end, basically we have taken a few quotations which are basically enough to build a case and destroy the Muslims on this point, at least, that they do allow these heinous activities. So the rest on top would probably be overkill, but not that it matters to them. When we look at the situation from today's perspective, at least from the perspective of rationality, human rationality that binds us all together, where we talk about justice, law, rights, and ethics,
Yeah,
where does it really leave them as a whole belief system? If we look at
it
it from
leaves them.
outside their religious perspective, where would it leave them anyway?
Hopefully, it would lead them to leave in Islam. That would be something that I think would be a good outcome, because I do believe that any sane rational person who believes their God is loving and then is really confronted with the horrifying truth of what their God allows and what their perfect man allows. If they would look at it, they would know this is not a perfect man. And this is no man that you want to follow. And these are not teachings that you or anyone would really want governing the lives of not only themselves, but their children, of their wives. I would hope that. But if not, I mean, just, I suppose, acceptance and then possibly, as I say, a reevaluation and maybe because we already have Muslims making excuses for this. And if they accept it, I don't see any other option other than leaving. I was raised as a Catholic, and when I found out about certain things or looked into things I was like, this clearly isn't from God, and or I just don't like that particular teaching. I can't follow this. That was how I kind of approached it. I would hope Muslims would do the same, because my ultimate goal would be, if Islam was just like any other religion, and was able to get on with the neighbors nicely like every other religion does, there would be no problem. Islam doesn't. There's a reason that everywhere Islam is, there's a problem. And it's not because people have this inbuilt hatred to Muslims, because as you can see, most people still try to make excuses for them. They still try to make excuses for Islam. They're just like everybody else. It's a religion of peace. We have it all the time. But the reality is far different. If we're just honest about what we see around us, there's a problem. So the ultimate end result of all of this is that the Muslim leaves Islam and that Islam does collapse. And I do believe that is going to happen anyway. Maybe slightly later more than soon. I mean, we only have our little short lifetime on earth. I don't think it's going to be that long. A few decades, I think Islam is in trouble. The internet is its worst nightmare. I was only able to find out the things that I was through the internet, and also having a partner who was was a Muslim at the time, being able to understand things from the Arabic point of view that she could read to me and stuff. And so I think there's so much information out there now. It's just putting it together and taking the fight to them in a peaceful way, but debating with them and showing them that this is what their religion teaches. And for me, that's the only way this can either end, because I think that, the apostasy rates are huge now anyway in Pakistan and places like that. So I think that is really the end result of these sorts of teachings, and the awareness of them amongst the public is that there's no escape now. There's no excuse you can throw. There's something horrifying in this religion. And once Muslims start to believe that, I think they'll start to leave it in greater rates than they are now. And it's already speeding up.
Right. And there is a result, and that is probably a result of your bravery as well, actually standing up to them and debating with them and not losing your cool, because like we discussed, they use several tactics to try diverting and derailing the debates until it becomes a bit of a shouting match. People get
Yes.
emotional. And I think the other thing I've also
Absolutely.
noticed is that many people try debating with them politely and rationally, which is all fine, but that shouldn't mean that you give in to political correctness and try sugarcoating some of the more, controversial aspects to
Absolutely.
weaken them.
Absolutely, that is something that happens, and I've even found myself doing that in debates, because you almost start to feel bad for them because it's so horrifying, and you try to be so diplomatic, but you have to remember that they will never be the same with you. You will not get the same respect or concern. They are taught that your religion is in fact, every religion is the source of evil, and so it must be combated until you know the truth, which is allegedly Islam. But you want to be polite, but at the same time, you have to be very strong in your debate and not sugarcoat, as you say. You have to show them the truth, the terrifying truth. And you can just use their scripture to do it. You can use their best scholars. The scholars they usually quote to show Islam is good. You can show, they say, this, which shows that it's bad. And so I think it's just an awareness of these things. And so people like me try to put this out online. I tend to put it more on YouTube now, so people can just take the information. It's not to get views, although I'd love loads of views, and the only reason is because the more people that see it, the more people get the truth. I'd love people to actually be able to see the stuff that is out there. They will have access to the greatest sources, Islam's best sources. That's all you really need to do, is show them what their scholars say, and then they know what their religion is based on, which is the interpretation of the text by the scholars. So if you show them how the scholars are literally interpreting your religion regarding child marriage and stuff, then there's no way around it. And as we said, it's not just child marriage, it is absolute intercourse with minors. only when they're able to bear it, which is based on their size. And also remember, that's because of Muhammad as well, because Muhammad fattened up Aisha. Because when he married her at 6, Muslims will say, oh, but he waited till she was 9. No, he didn't wait till she was 9. He ordered her to be fattened up from the moment he married her at 6 in order to be able to have sex with her. Because at 6, she was just too small. He would have damaged her. So he ordered the mother to fatten her up so then he could have sex with her. And so that is why the scholars now say you can have sex with a 6, 7, 8-year-old if she looks like she can bear it, and that's based on whether she's big enough. Here is just...
But I think that is basically Achilles' heel in their argument as well, because if he's fattening her up, that means that he's aware that there is potential or, a very assured possibility of damage, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the only mechanism for child protection, is that they acknowledge that there's dangers. And so when you look at a lot of the legal texts around this, the scholars who are obsessed with talking about child marriage because they are trying to optimize the earliest opportunity to have intercourse with that child, they are acutely aware of this physical. So it's actually got a name called ifta, and that's the damage of the vagina and the anus, and it's in all of their legal texts. And so they clearly was aware it was happening, because girls were clearly suffering from this, because they were getting it wrong, because the criteria is so poor that, based on a subjective assessment of her physical capability by looking at the size of her, doesn't really tell you how developed she is eternally. And so obviously they were going along with the guidance, and clearly kids were being damaged. And so even the scholars look like they've created their own kind of laws to try and make it slightly safer, because what Allah and Muhammad provided was really terrifying and not safe at all.
Right. And that is a horrific, this is a horrific
It's
episode,
horrific.
to be honest, but it should also wake up quite a lot of people to what the reality is. And
Absolutely, yeah.
thank you very much for taking the time out and actually informing us and enlightening us about all this and providing the sources for us and the work you do on a daily basis, bravely going and confronting these people.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. No, it's nice to talk to yourself and people like you that are also trying to do good work, and to try and raise awareness in their own communities. Because as I have mentioned, we do have a child rape gang problem in the UK, and it isn't just white English girls that are suffering. Sikh girls here are being targeted as well. I'm going to a march in London in about an hour's time, and there will be plenty of Sikhs there trying to raise awareness of what's happening to their daughters at the hands of many Muslim men. And again, I don't say it's all Muslims, but I shouldn't have to point that out. As I said before, the religion allows it, and that's why it's happening. It doesn't matter if it's all of them or some of them, it's enough of them, and it's disproportionately so. And they are race hate crimes as well, because they're specifically targeting non-Muslim girls, Sikh girls, Christian girls. They don't do it to their own girls, although they can themselves marry minors. The reason they don't do it in this country is because, of course, they'll be put in prison. Although it still does happen behind the scenes, of course, it still happens. But yeah, I'm sorry it was a bit of a horrible topic to discuss, but it is an important one because it's a real one, and the consequences are too terrifying to ignore. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to have this chat with you. And as I say, if anybody was interested, I'm happy to do a presentation with all the references and much more that you could then just use at your own leisure and to maybe do some good work yourselves.
Thank you very much for that. So until
You're
next
welcome.
time, hopefully you will be back, and thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Take care and speak soon.
Thank you very much. So, to our listeners, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh, and until next time.
सादा सो विद्यालय नहीं की कृपा सब संत मरे नहीं की कृपा के सने हम हैं नहीं पोसो गरीब